Over the last decade, Ukraine has been battered by revolution, economic crises and the loss of Crimea to Russia. Now, with tension in the east continuing and millions driven from their homes by war, a new battle is underway against deeply entrenched corruption and the power of overmighty oligarchs. We've been to the strategically vital Black Sea port of Odessa to investigate.
In its attempt to rid itself of a Soviet legacy, in the past 10 years, Ukraine has seen 2 revolutions, a dramatic economic crisis, and the loss of Crimea to Russia. Worst of all is the ongoing war with Russian-backed separatists in the east that has cost thousands of lives. But many fear there is an even greater danger threatening Ukraine: corruption. On such a scale, it could actually bring the country down. Three years ago in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, people took to the streets when then-President Viktor Yanukovych reneged on promises to sign an association agreement with the EU, opting for closer ties with Putin's Russia. Yanukovych sent troops onto the streets, who opened fire on peaceful protesters, but guns and violence weren't enough to quell a popular uprising, and Yanukovych fled to Russia. Today, Yanukovych is gone, but the ruling elite have barely changed. The power remains in the hands of a small group of the country's richest businessmen, oligarchs who made fortunes in corrupt deals following the collapse of the Soviet Union.
State-owned enterprises were used and are still used by oligarchs as a source of free cash, where we've seen so-called management privatization, where oligarchs would put their own management and they will flood the money out from these companies.
As their fortunes grew, so did their political influence, allowing them to block reforms aimed at curbing corruption.
All of them, they have their own factions within the parliament. So whenever a decision has to be made, unfortunately, their MPs would provide necessary votes versus democratic forces who are independent.
It's reached the point where half the country's GDP is either spent on bribes or siphoned off by the oligarchs. All that's keeping the country solvent are massive IMF loans. But this bargaining chip has allowed foreign lenders to insist on one condition: the formation of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. ARTEM SYTNYK heads the organization, which has been operating for 6 months. With political assassinations not uncommon, it's a dangerous job. Outside his office, 2 tanks stand guard.
Коррупция, она является вторым фронтом для Украины и, возможно, еще более опасным, чем фронт на востоке нашей страны. Почему? Потому что коррупция – это, по моему мнению, одной из основных угроз для нашего государственного суверенитета. Если мы проиграем, то проиграет вся Украина, и, возможно, это приведет к краху Украины как государства. Поэтому у нас нет возможности проиграть. Наша команда, она не такая большая, но она настроена на то, что мы все-таки будем бороться до конца.
The Anti-Corruption Bureau is making waves. This is the arrest of one of the country's top judges. In a separate case, the Bureau is prosecuting a corrupt MP and his accessory. The Bureau is not popular with the oligarchs.
Действительно, в той или иной степени по каждому уголовному делу, которое мы расследуем, мы наступаем на интересы какого-то конкретного олигарха. Поэтому вызовы, которые стоят перед антикоррупционным бюро, они огромны. То есть мы имеем сопротивление старой коррупционной системы, представители ее есть в парламенте, есть в правительстве, в в других правоохранительных органах. Поэтому сопротивление нашей работы очень большое.
$12 billion simply disappears from Ukrainian public funds every year. And it is having a catastrophic effect. Underpaid public servants like doctors are forced to resort to taking bribes in order to make ends meet.
I was shocked by one story. There was a lady, she was around 50, 55, and she said she didn't have a family to take care of her. So the doctors told her to put the money into the socks, because when you go to the surgery, you're completely naked. All you have is a kind of a blanket on. They were afraid if she dies on the surgery table that nobody's going to pay them for their work. So they asked her to put the money in her socks because that's the only thing she had on. I'm not saying all the doctors demand money, but the majority of them do.
However, for some, living with the consequences of corruption is a never-ending struggle. Take Tamara, whose son Andrei has haemophilia. Tamara, her husband and Andrei exist day to day in a one-room communal flat. The medicines needed to keep Andrei alive should be given for free, but Tamara and her husband have to work 7 days a week to scrimp together enough money to buy them on the black market. Sometimes she can only buy out-of-date medicine, which might prove lethal.
И глаза ребенок на меня смотрит, говорит: мам, а что если что-то будет, какая-то реакция? Я говорю: сына, садись, все будет хорошо. Я на свой страх и риск беру жизнь своего ребенка и ввожу ему препарат. Состояние мое я вам передать просто не могу. У меня не то, что дрожали руки, у меня все внутри дрожало, потому что я понимала, либо у меня ребенок умирает от боли, от кровотечения, либо я ему ввожу просроченный препарат, и это будет хорошо.
Tamara's story is just one example out of millions in Ukraine. Even the health minister admits there's a problem.
It's awful, and it is quite difficult to accept, quite difficult to see. And in this regard, of course, we would like to say thank you very much to volunteers who have tried to support such patients.
Although the government has introduced some successful reforms to the healthcare system, without Ukraine's thousands of medical volunteers, things would be a lot worse. ANYA was one such volunteer who worked at the Red Cross, but even she encountered corruption. Aid meant for war refugees was being sold on the black market.
I get the list of beneficiaries of the Ukrainian Red Cross, and I called those people just to ask whether they get aid. They said, sorry, it is a cafe. You're just the wrong number. And then I realized that the whole list of beneficiaries I have, it's fake. They just random numbers, random addresses, random people.
When ANYA raised these concerns with the president of the Ukrainian Red Cross, she was fired.
They say, you are not deserved to be a volunteer of Ukrainian Red Cross. And my movement in Kiev, which counted 60 people, they said, no, you are no more volunteers, you are no more part of the movement, we don't want to see you here, go away. So we are just deleted or fired.
The result of this kind of corruption committed by senior officials is that those who need help most seldom receive it. It's particularly bad for the hundreds of thousands of refugees from the war, many of whom now find themselves in Kiev. Like the SYTNYK family, who were forced to flee Crimea when it was annexed by Russia.
Угрожали, что в случае чего не отберут детей, меня посадят и все, найдут по какой статье. И там это очень много людей пропало.
With 11 people sharing just a few rooms, it may look cramped. But the SYTNYKs felt lucky to be somewhere safe and have a roof over their heads, given to them courtesy of American aid. And yet even this family have fallen victim to corruption. They're being pressured to leave by local officials eager to cash in on the generosity of American taxpayers by subletting the apartment.
полгода отжили. С декабря месяца начали нас терроризировать. Поставили нам такие сроки. Там, неделя вам на выезд, потом вам воду, свет, тут все отключат, короче, и вам все равно придется отсюда покинуть.
Yet more casualties of the war that disproportionately affects the poor, while Ukraine's powerful elite have grown fat on the conflict.
As long as these people are making money on it, this war will be needed for them as well, not only for Russians.
Following Russia's intervention in 2014, the power of the oligarchs grew rapidly. With a corrupt and underfunded army, Ukraine's fledgling government resorted to appointing such people as governors of the country's most vulnerable regions. Ukraine's most powerful oligarch, Igor Kolomoisky, took control of Dnepropetrovsk in the east, paying for a private army and putting a price on every separatist's head.
He was presented as a savior of the region that was not occupied, and people actually very much supported him and believed in him.
However, Kolomoisky's PR unraveled when alarming images of the oligarch went viral on the internet. These showed his private army seizing control of the headquarters of state oil company UKRAINIAN, when his illicit control of it came under threat.
Last year, the state decided to replace the management of the state-owned 100% state-owned company that has the pipelines and its operation and control. Kolomoisky learned about it, and he came with his private army, and he seized the building.
It was a pivotal moment, which could have resulted in a vital state asset being seized by Kolomoisky's army. Following a tense standoff, the president, Petro Poroshenko, fired the oligarch, and in a desperate bid to tackle corruption, he appointed former Georgian president MIKHEIL SAAKASHVILI as the new governor of Odessa, the epicenter of Kolomoisky's empire. It was a controversial appointment. Only a year earlier, Saakashvili had been forced to flee Georgia following charges of abuse of power. However, he was lauded in the West for bringing democracy to the post-Soviet state, as well as purging his country of corruption. But could the Georgian achieve the same success in Odessa?
Я буду работать и всех тоже приглашаю вместе поработать, чтобы люди чувствовали, что что-то реально меняется.
Saakashvili took Ukrainian citizenship and immediately targeted Kolomoisky's operations.
Kolomoisky controlled lots of smuggling in the ports. The problem is that there is a whole range of officials that would, for money, just grant him all kind of privileges.
Dozens of corrupt port officials who had been working for the oligarchs were fired. 80% of goods shipped into Ukraine come through the port of Odessa, and as such, it's a major source of illicit revenue. If Odessa could be tackled, then there was hope for the rest of the country. Saakashvili appointed Yulia MARUSHEVSKAYA to the post of Chief Customs Officer for the port. MARUSHEVSKAYA is the poster girl of the Maidan Revolution.
I am the Ukrainian, the native of Kiev,
whose I Am a Ukrainian YouTube video rallied millions at the height of the protests. The idea of a 26-year-old taking on the smugglers captured the imagination of the nation and put a spotlight on Odessa as the front line in the fight against corruption.
For me, this job is continuation of a struggle that we started 2 years ago. Because we stood up against corruption 2 years ago. We are just continuing this struggle for building a new, normal, successful country.
Under her leadership, a new team of young customs officers is being trained by Americans and gradually replacing the old corrupt ones. MARUSHEVSKAYA's predecessors were making a fortune from the port customs, but not anymore.
The bribe for each container was about $700 just for them. If you have 10,000 of such containers, it's up to $1 million per month that were paid as bribes. Having my team here, it means that this everyday bribing is closed, and that irritates a lot of other people. I'm told that, you know, you are a very expensive woman because it costs a lot for corrupt people to have someone who is not taking bribes in this position. All the heads of the customs of other regions, they sent a letter that I am breaking the ethics of Ukrainian customs officer. That was very fun. They asked to fire me.
And it's not just at the port that Saakashvili has brought in new blood. He has also appointed his compatriot, Georgy Lordkipanidze, as Odessa's new chief of police. An ex-deputy of the Minister of Interior of Georgia, Lordkipanidze is known for a zero-tolerance approach to corruption. In a drive to clean up the police, he has sacked hundreds of corrupt officers and recruited many new ones.
Они сами говорили, что да, мы берем деньги, потому что у нас низкая зарплата, никакой помощи нету. Ни с министерства, ни с государства, и мы вынуждены брать деньги. То я сказал, что я не смогу с такими людьми работать, которые берут деньги. И некоторых сотрудников нам пришлют арестовать.
Lordkipanidze issued an ultimatum to local mobsters, warning them to leave Odessa within a month. After which he began cleaning up the city, seizing and disposing of contraband, closing illegal casinos, and jailing mobsters.
И когда меня назначили, я сразу дал всем месяц, что если в Одессе будут вори в законе, я все буду делать, что их как-то оказать за решетки.
None of Saakashvili's changes have gone down well with the mayor of Odessa, Gennadiy TRUKHANOV, who, despite appearances, is an enemy of the governor.
I have a local mayor that has international mafia connections. That's very obvious. I mean, he was a bodyguard of a guy who spent many years in prison for kidnappings and killings. They're each other's business partners. And when you go for city contracts, the city contracts, basically 100% of city contracts go only to their companies. And everybody knows that. It's like whatever you read about Chicago of the times of Al Capone, that's Odessa now.
Вы знаете, мне сложно комментировать, что предполагает себе Михеил Саакашвили. Дело в том, что я бы ему рекомендовал также сегодня, вот и вам скажу, меньше употреблять наркотики, и тогда не будет мерещиться никакая мафия вокруг. Мафия ему мешает проводить реформы в Украине. Мафия мешает ему находиться на рабочем месте. Мафия мешает ему много чего делать. Но борьба с мафией и с другими преступными организациями – это не его задача.
Outside the mayor's office, this demonstration accuses TRUKHANOV of illegal activity. A charge given some weight by the Panama Papers, which revealed that TRUKHANOV is in fact a Russian citizen, which by law bars him from office, as well as having many undeclared companies which are registered to his Moscow address. Nevertheless, TRUKHANOV, seen here addressing his supporters at a rally, was re-elected last October in a controversial election and is regarded by many as a pro-Russian.
He is a Russian. He is from that group that basically thinks that Odessa is Russia, after all. And so he's not just a Russian. He was an officer of the Russian army, the very army that is attacking now Ukraine. But it doesn't stop him from being on the side of Russian nationalists. There are many people in Odessa who think that, yeah, Odessa belongs to Russia.
Я бы рекомендовал господину Саакашвили разобраться в своих гражданствах и в гражданствах своих подчиненных, которых он привез сюда, собрав беглецов, которые бегают по всей Европе от правосудия.
Despite the mayor's condemnation of Saakashvili, when the president came to visit Odessa, it was TRUKHANOV who was not invited. President Poroshenko clearly prefers Odessa to remain Ukrainian.
Саме одесити не піддалися на згенеровану Москвою сепаратистську пропаганду, чітко зайняли позицію на підтримку суверенітету, територіальної цілісності і незалежності нашої держави.
But mostly Russian-speaking Odessa remains a potential flashpoint. Days after Crimea was seized in 2014 and the east of the country fell to separatists, these pro-Russian demonstrators marched through the city. They were then met by a large crowd of loyal Ukrainians. In the ensuing fracas, the pro-Russians retreated to the Customs Union building, a large administrative block. When shots were fired at the Ukrainians from inside the building, it was set alight and 48 people perished in the subsequent fire. In fact, Odessa is where Putin's Ukrainian adventure was halted, but few doubt it remains a target.
Well, it's very, very strategic area of Ukraine. Basically, it's the south flank of Ukraine, without which not only Ukraine would fall, the entire region would be destabilized if this region goes to the dark side.
Since the violence of 2014, the pro-Russians have been keeping a low profile, not least because of the proliferation of nationalist paramilitaries who maintain a visible presence in the city. The paramilitaries claim there's a direct link between Russia and corruption and are turning their attention to the fight against it. In just one example, checking trucks in and out of the city.
У нас зараз основна ціль – це зберегти державність, да? І щоб Україна залишилась суверенною державою, і щоб вона не була під впливом Росії. Корупція – це почва, на якому можна руйнувати державу. Дуже великий сектор економіки української належить росіянам. Вони і підштовхують розвиття корупції.
VITALY KOZHUKAR leads a paramilitary group calling itself Self-Defense. Its 1,000 members train at a location not far from Odessa. Last April, when relatives of those who perished in the Customs Union building fire tried to lay flowers at the scene of the tragedy, they were prevented from doing so by KOZHUKAR's men.
Ті люди, які налаштовані зараз не проукраїнські. Вони мовчать, але вони не проукраїнські.
The situation is far from ideal, but it's fair to say that the presence of these militias is a deterrent to Vladimir Putin, and many think that out of the two they are the lesser evil. It's a delicate time. And yet, even amidst all this tension, there is actually optimism in the air. Most people believe that the country is edging slowly towards Europe and leaving Russia's sphere of influence. The young of Ukraine demand and expect change.
Well, the thing is that Ukrainians lost so many people at Maidan. So many thousands of people were killed in the war with Russia in the east that, you know, the young generation cannot step back. So, and to change something, to believe in it, well, you have to believe in it. So that's why everybody is optimistic, even though we expected much more reforms, much more changes within these last 2 years. But still, you have to be optimistic, you have to believe, and you have to push hard.
And when last May, Crimean pop star JAMALA won Eurovision for her country, Ukrainians went wild. Her song about Russian aggression in the Crimea captured the mood of the nation, and she returned to a hero's welcome. A rare cause for celebration. It represented something much bigger than winning a song contest. Europe was showing solidarity with Ukraine in its hour of need.
Борьба не просто такая, знаете, глупая, просто бьешь там об стенку, разбиваешь лоб, и потом идешь в крови и говоришь, что больно. А секрет украинцев сейчас именно в том, что они идут к своей цели. Где-то хорошо, где-то не очень, где-то не так быстро, как хотелось бы за 2 года, да, о том новом времени, о котором мы все время так говорили. Но есть четкое понимание, что мы движемся вперед. Вот это я чувствую внутренне.
But the question remains, can the strong determination of the people overcome the corrupt political elite and bring about the changes Ukrainians deserve?